Well, this morning we're doing a series titled Heroes of the Faith, and you can find your place in the church Bibles in front of you. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 3, and the church Bible there, the page number is 54. Heroes of the Faith is a series where we try to explore how God interacted with, how God revealed himself to the people in the Old Testament. Specific characters, unique circumstances, and in each of those, what you see is something happens to that person, and God ends up using that story, and the point of that is that people would see God, people would meet God, that a testimony would form, and that people would learn to trust God. Everything God's doing in the Bible is about people finding peace, reconciliation, mercy, forgiveness, salvation, and with that comes boundaries. So, don't cross this line, don't do these things. But the point of that is that love can be protected because love requires boundary lines. You need to be able to say, this is how far you can go. This is what grace looks like, and this is what abuse looks like, and this is, and on and on and on we go. So this look at the Old Testament this summer, we're doing 5-6 weeks of this, and we're looking at the story of Moses today. And as you find your places, or if you've already found your place, one of the things I wanted to do this weekend is just share a little bit about how the story of Moses finds itself in our formation, even as a country, which is really unique. 250 years ago, a group of men sat in a sweltering room in Philadelphia, and they tried to come up with an image that would represent a nation that did not yet exist. And so these people were merchants and lawyers and farmers and philosophers. And there was two guys, Benjamin Franklin and also Thomas Jefferson. And what they did is they came up with this idea of a seal of the United States that depicted Moses standing at the edge of a Red Sea with a staff raised up, waters parting, with the motto, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. It's kind of crazy. But that's what they thought they would do. So, but both of those images, both of those ideas got rejected because it wasn't where they wanted to go. But the instinct behind them was not a bad idea. The idea was these were both oppressed. Both of these guys, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they both saw themselves in the Moses narrative under extreme oppression, and They were connecting with this call toward freedom and a God that would make a way where there was no way. And that's where the story of Moses enters. And what's remarkable about the story of Moses is Moses almost didn't go. God calls him, but Moses almost doesn't follow him. Before there was an exodus, there was a burning bush, and before Moses led anyone anywhere, God had to convince him to take a step forward. The conversation on that mountain is one of the most honest, the most human, the most theologically rich exchanges in all of the Bible. Moses pushed back against God. He objected, and he gave God 5 reasons why he was the wrong person for the job. And here's what I want you to see this morning. We do the same thing. God calls us, God gives us opportunity, God leads us, and then we end up saying, I think you have the wrong person. I don't have the right credentials. I'm not fit for this. I don't know if I believe in you. Can I just tell you, that's where Moses was. A burning bush. Like it's a bush that's on, we'll read about it. But there's a bush that's on fire. It's talking to him. And he's like, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. I don't want to do it. Maybe you're real, but I'm not sure I'm the guy. And I think the problem that arises with this, that the story of Moses and God, the story that it really develops is we disqualify ourselves from God's call before God ever does. We end up saying no to ourselves, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But it's the problem the text addresses, and the God who answers Moses is the same God who is speaking to you today. Sometimes we say no to God because we just don't want to risk him not being real or us feeling like we fail. And what we're going to see today is how God takes people who disqualify themselves and still does something incredible through them. That's what the story of Moses teaches. And so the theme is throughout this text is God meets us in our objections and he walks us through them, not around them. He's going to say to you, you might say no, but he's going to take you through it if you'll trust him, if you'll follow him. But make no mistake, God is the one that initiates. He takes the first move. He takes the first step, and we will push back almost instinctively because we struggle to see beyond what we can see. Faith is hard. It's always been hard. It's always been hard. It was hard with Moses. It was hard with Abraham. It's always been hard. But what God does with this man who pushes back is one of the most significant things in the entire scripture, because he takes someone who's objecting, resisting, negotiating, and he walks them through one of the greatest deliverance moments in all of the Bible until Jesus, which makes, if you're a theologically minded person here this morning, Moses represents one of the greatest Christ types in the Bible, because he delivers a nation. God uses Moses to deliver the nation. So he's a prototype of Jesus who will deliver the world. Jesus is the greatest deliverance person. He's greater than Moses. So that's why in Revelation and in Hebrews, you see these callbacks to Christ is the greater Moses. And if you don't connect with how big Moses was, and you're like, well, what does that matter? But that's why it matters. He's a Christ type. Let me set the context for our study in Exodus 3. To understand this passage, you have to understand a little bit the lineage of the Hebrew people. It begins with Abraham, who had one son. That son's name was Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob had many sons, and those are the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, Jacob's name gets changed from Jacob to Israel, and his sons then become the 12 tribes of Israel. And God has a habit of doing that. He likes to change people's names. He likes to change their course in life, set their destiny. And one of those sons that Jacob had, Israel had, his name was Joseph. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, ended up in Egypt, and when Jacob's family fell on hard times, they came to Egypt to be with Joseph, and they stayed 400 years there. It's a long time. That's a lot of hundreds of years. Now, by the time Moses is born, the descendants of Jacob have grown into a massive people. There's maybe millions of them. We don't know accurately, but there's a lot. So much so that Pharaoh feels threatened and orders that all of the male children are killed. Moses' mother places them in a basket on the Nile. That Moses floats right by Pharaoh's daughter. She finds them, brings them into the royal household where Moses grows up. So Moses grows up inside the house of the very man who was oppressing all of the people. This is quite a remarkable story. He eventually discovers who he is, Moses, kills an Egyptian who is mistreating a Hebrew, and then he flees into the wilderness. He heads off, he finds himself in Midian, and he marries a woman named Zipporah and becomes a shepherd for her father Jethro. I like to say his father-in-law got him a job. Okay, sorry. I know it was... Anyway, where we find Moses today. He's off in the wilderness. He's 80 years old. He's shepherding sheep. His significance in the royal household is gone. He's holding a murder. He's not very qualified. We don't know anything about his faith other than he grew up in an Egyptian house, not a Hebrew house, which means he probably understood Egyptian gods more than he understood Hebrew gods. So he's just kind of this guy, way out in the middle of nowhere, far from Egypt, far from his people, far from everything he wants to do. And it's there in the middle of nowhere that everything changes, and that's where we find ourselves in Exodus chapter 3. Way out in the middle of nowhere, verse 1, it says, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God." I find verse 2 really interesting. "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." So it's a little more than a burning bush. I think sometimes in Christian history and in Christian story, we just adopt little pieces of the Bible we like, but this is more than just a burning bush. This is the angel of the Lord, in fact. And he's in a flame of a fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Verse 4, when the Lord saw, verse 3, and Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Why the bush is not burned? And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush. Now, by the way, there's like a dozen messages in this that we can preach. I'm going to give you one that has to do about how I think God deals with Moses' incredible stubbornness and lack of faith and challenging nature. And when I read this story, I'm telling you the lesson that strikes me really important. I think that will help us understand that God can use anybody this morning, even if you've disqualified yourself before God has. Even if you think you got nothing left, even if you've been serving God your whole life and maybe you think I got nothing left to do. I think there's a lot of that message. That's what we're going to talk about today. But we could go through and preach a dozen messages in here. So, I'll give you an example. Verse 3. Verse 2 tells us the bushes, there's a flame, and the angel of the Lord in there. So how does God get Moses' attention? Does he say, Moses? That's not the first step. God initiates, but he initiates with a miraculous sign. And Moses has to do this. Well, that's weird. And Moses turning toward God represents openness to the mystery of God. So that's a message we could preach this morning. Are you open to the mystery of God, or have you already said, no? No, I don't want to be open. Moses, at least, was open. Now, he gets into all kinds of trouble in the rest of this text, but he turns toward God. That's a very important thing for you this morning. I can't preach that message. I have a different one for you. But I would tell you, will you just turn toward God? That's number one. Number two, once he turns toward God, God meets him. So God takes initiative. Moses turns toward God. Verse 3, verse 4 now. Now God calls to him 2 times. Moses, Moses. It's emphatic. It means once we turn so symbolically, when we turn toward God, God sees you. That's another message. When you turn toward God, God sees you. Moses, Moses. God doesn't repeat himself. He didn't stutter. This is really important. He's making a point to say, I know your name. Really important. Moses responds, here I am, verse 5. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Now, I find it remarkable that a person that grew up in a royal household doesn't have decorum in this amazing and miraculous moment. He didn't bow. He didn't throw himself to the floor. I mean, if Pharaoh walked in, how would he behave? There would be a whole lot of bowing, looking down, whatever. But in this moment, he loses his decorum. So there's something unique that's happening in his heart. Something has hardened to the point where he can't recognize decorum, respect. Okay? And so God tells him, remove your sandals from your feet. Why? Why does he do that? Here's what I think, and this is another message I'm not going to preach, but I think you should consider this morning. I think there's something here that represents the idea of the insulation that we place between ourselves and God. You wear shoes when you walk outside, right? I mean, some of you need to wear shoes here. Come on. We wear shoes. Why? What do shoes do for us? They protect our feet, don't they? They insulate us from the harshness of the world. So God is saying, you don't need protection between me and you. That's a whole other message we could preach this morning. How often do we go to the Lord and say, I don't trust you, you're too dangerous, I need to insulate myself from you, so I'm going to keep my shoes on. And God says, take your shoes off and come over this way. You can trust me even though I'm powerful. But we insulate psychologically, emotionally, we insulate financially, we insulate physically. We put all kinds of barriers and boundaries around ourselves because we don't want God to get close. We want to keep God at a safe distance. That's what verse 5 represents. Verse 6, and he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. You only hide your face when you get found out. You only hide your face when you get found. That means at this point, Moses is convinced that this is really God. He really does see him. And he found him in the place where he was hiding hundreds of miles from Egypt at this point, in a mountain where he's herding sheep at 80. I mean, how far away can you get from your calling? You're like, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go as far away as possible. And that's where that's where God finds him. And I'll just give you the first point right off the bat. It's the point is God interrupts ordinary life with an extraordinary call. Okay? We want to feel like God's going to meet us in some miraculous moment. And that could be true, but he finds Moses while he's shepherding. He's already shepherding, which means his soul within Midian for about 40 years has been framed, shaped. His soul is being shaped in the vein of shepherding, in the theme of shepherding. And then God finds him there, and he says, I have something bigger. Now, how we respond is really important. But I do want to highlight right now, sometimes we think God's calling has moved beyond us, and sometimes we think that we're too old and it's past us. And there's a couple of stories I have this morning that kind of connect to our history as a nation in celebration of or just carrying the theme of 4th of July into our midst that I want to share with you. One of those has to do with Benjamin Franklin. When he was 81 years old, he was at a constitutional convention in 1787. Oldest delegate in the room. And he was in constant physical pain. In fact, the history books say that they had to roll him out in a sedan of a wheelchair, which means sedan has doors, right? It's kind of weird. But anyway, they brought him into this assembly. He gets up and he speaks, and he had every reason to consider his life work finished because he was done. He was in pain. And yet, when the convention nearly collapsed in late June over the question of representation, it was Franklin who gets up and called the delegates to prayer, reminding them that without God's help, there was no way that they would succeed. They needed God to help them through this moment, or else they would just be like the builders of the Tower of Babel. That's what he told the delegates. And at 81 years old, in pain, he thought he was done. He became the moral voice of the room at its most critical moment. God interrupted his retirement, is the point. And he said, I got something for you to do. And that was really, really important. God interrupts ordinary life with an extraordinary call. He did it with Moses. The question is, how is he doing it with you? Are you open to God interrupting your life, or have you already said, I don't want any more? I don't want any more. Because the story of Moses and God is one that begins when Moses is 80 years old. That means he's like, I just want to play golf. I just want to die in peace. I just want to be on the mountain. I don't want anyone to bother me. And God's like, I'm going to send you to the greatest civilization in the world, and you're going to challenge the greatest leader in the world, and you're going to call all of those people out of Egypt. That's crazy. That's crazy. If you're waiting for the right season, don't. You just got to wait on the Lord. Keep your eyes tuned to the Lord. Let's look at verse 7 to 15. Let me read it to you. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, the Perizzites, Hivites, the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you when you have brought the people out of Egypt. You shall serve God on this mountain. Verse 13, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say? This is like, here's what you're supposed to get. Like, there's all these little objections. It's really kind of dumb. I mean, really, if you look at this, it's like, what kind of objection is that? The fire is speaking to you. I mean, okay, so go in there. And Moses is like, well, if I go, what am I going to tell them your name is? That's kind of a weird objection. It's really, really, really weak. But it makes this massive point, because in verse 14, God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, thus I am to be remembered through all generations. So, God opens with 3 major declarations. I have seen, I have heard, I am concerned. God has watched his people suffer under Egypt for 400 years and has not looked away. Then he drops the commission, go to Pharaoh, bring my people out. Moses says, I can't do it. And God says, you're right, but I can. You're not I am. I am. I am. That's what God's saying. So we bring our objections, but God is saying, I am. That's the theological center of this passage. I am who I am. We're supposed to see the power of God revealed through the I am, the amazing God of the universe. God's existence is his credential, and that is enough. And what it teaches us is that God's call is greater than your inadequacy. The question is, will you step out? We can feel as though we're not eligible to serve God in this way, but we can if he calls, because he takes the initiative. This has never been about Moses' credentials. Moses is a murderer. Moses is someone who runs away. Moses is someone who did a lot of bad things. Moses is not righteous. So why does God choose him? Because this story is about God and what he will do through people's inadequacy. That's the point. The question is, will you step out? Will you step out? Because it takes a lot of faith to step out. And that reminds me of a story didn't remind me. I found a story that connects to this. It's 1841 in Nantucket. A guy named Frederick Douglass stood on a platform and he was trembling. At the time, he was a fugitive slave with no formal education, no legal standing, and no protection. He never had spoken publicly before, and what came out of that trembling, unqualified man became the most powerful abolitionist voice in American history. He stood up and talked about why freedom was important, and he convinced the nation to help highlight freedom for all people at that time in 1841. He did not stand there because he felt ready, because he wasn't. Not educated. He stepped out there for faith, and he stood there because the call was larger than his fear. That's what we mean when we say God's call is greater than your inadequacy. You got to trust. So I just want to ask you, what's the thing God's putting in front of you that you keep saying no to? Only you know that, but God's speaking to you. What's he telling you to do? He's not asking you to be enough. I know that. Moses wasn't enough. He is asking, will you step out in faith? Take that step. Now, from verse 15, look, I really think you should just read the book of Exodus, the whole thing. Just read it all. It's so good. But if you just read the first 5, 6 chapters, you get this idea. You see this back and forth between Moses and Aaron and God. But from verse 15 all the way to the end of chapter 3, and then into the beginning of chapter 4, there's a lot that happens, okay? Moses has been given the most significant commission in Israel's history, and he's still not convinced. He still keeps telling God, no, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. So in chapter 4, God gives him some signs. He says, look, the staff will become a snake right here, right in front of the burning bush. Like, it's all happening right here. Staff becomes a snake, a hand turns leprous, then it's restored. Water becomes blood, and Moses is like, verse 10, what does it say? Moses is like, oh, I can't. Oh, verse 10? Yeah, but Moses said, oh, my Lord, I'm not eloquent. I mean, he just turned a staff into the, I mean, he's doing all these miracles, and Moses just can't keep up. He can't keep up. And so It says, I am not eloquent either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. Then the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Therefore, go and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. Verse 13, I think, is one of the saddest verses in the Bible. It's so sad. Verse 13. But Moses said, just send someone else. I'm 80 years old. I don't want to do it. It's like it's the moment Moses really is giving up on his call from God. And I don't know where you're at today. Here's another message we could preach, right? And I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know. I know some of your stories. I don't know all of them. But here's what I do know. At some point, we all hit this moment where we just say, God, I don't want to try anymore. I don't want to try anymore. And that's why I think this is an important story for you to know, because Moses is one of the greatest leaders. He's credited with one of the greatest deliverances in all the Bible, okay, in all of history. And so for us to understand that it begins with all of these excuses and all of these objections and all of these absolute failures. He's terrible at receiving God's call. God's saying, hey, try this. Hey, here's a stick. We're going to turn it into a snake. And Moses is like, send someone else. And I just want to tell you, if you push God far enough, verse 13, verse 14 happens. Then the anger of that like a lot of people are worried, like God's going to strike them because they sin. Oh, I sinned this way. Oh, I sinned that way. Oh, I did this, I did that, I did whatever. But God, what really makes God angry is if you keep telling him no, because what you're doing in that moment is you're saying, I'll be in charge, you take the back seat. And that's what Moses is doing. He's really rejecting God. He's saying, no, no, no. And God's like, let me show you my power. I mean, how many of us would love to see a miracle like that? You see a miracle and you're like, okay, I believe. That's really easy. God's like, here's one, here's another one, here's another one. And Moses is like, no, 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 no. I know the bush is on fire, but I don't want to talk about it anymore. I mean, you're just like, what are you doing? It's a crazy guy. And God, I think this is a little stinger, but God goes, that's fine. Here's what we'll do. Verse 14. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, how about we use your brother? He's on his way to see you. He likes you. Verse 15. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. So God doesn't even let him off the hook there. He's like, I'm going to give you the words, and you're going to have to give them to Aaron. So you're in this with me, buddy. The reluctant leader. Are you picking up Moses' reluctance? He just doesn't want to do it. And God's like, I need to use him. Why? Why does God want to use this guy? I'll speak for you. Can't God just heal him? If he's got a stuttering problem, I mean, God's about to make the whole Nile blood. He's about to split the Red Sea. Can't God just fix one man's tongue? So why not? Why does he not do that? Why doesn't God just fix Moses? Because God wants to teach you and me from then till now that he can work with anybody. Even people that keep saying no, 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 I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Moses is beyond skeptical. Moses is looking at the angel of the Lord in the burning bush and saying, yeah, I can see you, but I'm not quite sure I should follow you. Like, that's nuts. All of us, I just think it's an amazing story. So the lesson here is God equips who he calls. That's the point. That's the point. I think it's an important one. God equips the people, even if they resist, God equips those people. And I think all of us need a reminder that the lesson for us is to drop our pride and be humble before the God of the universe and keep seeking humility. And that's really hard because the more accomplished that we become, the more successful we make it in life or whatever, the harder it is to drop the humility. But humility is what God uses to change lives. And we see it in 1783. George Washington walks into a room full of officers who were done. They hadn't been paid. They'd given years of their life. And so they had this conspiracy forming to march on Congress by force and take what had been promised to them. If that march had happened just after the Revolutionary War, the American experiment would be over. The republic would collapse into the very military dictatorship the revolution had been fought to escape. So Washington shows up uninvited. His speech was not landing. The room was cold. Everyone was like, just get out of here. And then he goes to get a letter from Congress to speak to all these people. He pauses. He pulls out his spectacles, which at this point, his men had never seen him in a moment of vulnerable weakness. So he takes out, he shows up a retired general, a retired president, and he says, look, I need to share this to you. I need to share this with you. And he quietly says, and we've recorded him in history saying, gentlemen, please permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in service to my country. He's just telling them, I've given it all. I got nothing left to give except this encouragement to you that maybe you shouldn't march on Congress. And the room broke. The officers weep. And history says that the conspiracy was dissolved. Washington saved the republic by walking into a room that didn't want him there. He wasn't invited in, and he showed weakness, not strength. And people, God, let me just tell you, God can equip you if you step out. God equips who he calls, even if they resist. And as we close this morning, my hope for you will be that you will trust that God will support the vision that he has for your life, because he can see the fruit in your life well before you can. You just got to step out in faith. I'm going to invite our worship team up. I want to encourage you to trust God. He can use you. One of the most beautiful lessons from the life of Moses is that God uses people because God wants to walk with people. One of the most beautiful parts of the story of Moses is God uses people because he wants to. One of the most beautiful parts of this story is that God uses people and they're not perfect. They're not righteous. One of the most beautiful parts of Moses' story is he keeps telling God no. And God says, I can work with that. What does that mean for you and me? Just a little yes, and think where they could have been. God can use you. You just got to trust him. Every objection Moses raised, God answers. Humanity has a savior because God made a way. And the final objection humanity raised against God was a cross, and God answers that too. He answers it with a resurrection. And he says, come to the table. Remember the price of forgiveness, the price of salvation, the price of mercy. So as we prepare to take communion,